This is a look at a few headlines from a piece of research we undertook with 100 senior IT decision makers in UK commercial organisations with more than 1,000 employees. It examines their financial and their cultural commitment to IT security. The research took place in March 2013. First, looking at the sums involved in and the direction of expenditure on IT security, with a view to establishing what, if any, impact they have on attitudes and behaviours. 2/3 of enterprises surveyed say that IT security budgets have risen, and the average increase is 27%. Typically, these enterprises are ring-fencing just under 8% of their overall IT budget for security, but the range is quite wide. Around 1/3 spend more than 10% of their overall IT budget on security, and a similar proportion spends less than 5%. In a moment, we'll look at whether those two discrete groups act or think differently in any other significant ways when it comes to IT security. The first aspect we want to share with you is sensitivity to security threat. The survey presented a list of 10 potential security threats and asked respondents to rate how serious a threat they think each one is. This slide looks particularly at the perception of threats that arise when employees' attitudes or behaviour in the security context are lax in any way. And if you look at the blue and grey bars, they show that enterprises that have increased their IT security budget are significantly more likely to regard them as threats. So does this indicate some sort of security paranoia that leads to increased spending? In truth, probably not. These enterprises do not appear to be spending a greater part of their overall IT budget on security than the overall sample. The average remains for them at a little below 8%. So what might be the explanation? We could argue that it might be a reaction to some security incident, possibly associated with poor processes around employee access to corporate systems, or with the advent of BYOD. Or it could simply be that they benchmarked their spend on security, found themselves to be a little bit behind the curve and put that right. Either way, increasing budget doesn't produce an equivalent reduction in threat perception. Here we see that enterprises at the top end of the security spend range, spending more than 10% of their overall IT budget on security, are significantly more aware than those spending under 5% of threats that can arise from either internal or external sources. This suggests a higher level of vigilance when it comes to security. It might equally simply show that there are teams dedicated to IT security in those higher spending enterprises, and that obviously those dedicated teams would naturally be more vigilant. That's what they're there for. But either way, against the backdrop of constantly evolving and morphing security threat, it's important not to drop your guard. And it looks as though those larger spending enterprises are more aware of this fact than the rest. We've looked at expenditure and how that relates to sensitivity towards security threats. Now we'll look at enterprises' confidence in the protection they've put in place to counteract those threats. We looked at the same list of 10 potential security threats, this time checking the respondents' level of confidence in the protection measures they have in place to defend against them. The best answer they could have provided was to say that they were entirely confident in the specific controls they have. The general picture, however, is that in only certain examples could confidence be described as strong. The threats shown here are the ones where fewest respondents express entire confidence in their security measures. In fact, the highest number of respondents able to describe themselves entirely confident about their response to any single one of the threats was only 15% of the sample. Staying with the theme of weak confidence levels, 58 of the 100 were unable to describe themselves as entirely confident about their protection against any of the 10 security threats we presented to them in the survey. Remembering that on average 60% of enterprises surveyed do recognise the threat posed by each, there is quite a gap apparent between the strong perception of threat and the weak feeling of protection against those threats. Looking once more at how expenditure on IT security correlates with confidence, the group least likely to express entire confidence were those where security expenditure has remained static or even declined in the last 3 years. In this group, only 31% expressed entire confidence about any of their protection mechanisms. Conversely, the enterprises most likely to express entire confidence in their protection systems are those spending more than 10% of their IT budget on security. Yet even in this higher spending group, only 48% express entire confidence in any of the 10 threat protection mechanisms we researched. We saw earlier the link between sensitivity to threat and budget dedicated to IT security. Here we see that the level of confidence also correlates with the injection of funds into security. So, it's to be hoped that senior IT leaders in those enterprises where investment has stagnated or even fallen, which has led to low confidence in their protection systems, can make the case for additional funds before they fall foul of some of the threats they fear. The final few slides look at corporate and employee attitudes to security, how they vary across enterprises, and whether that variation in attitude causes or is caused by behaviour in the enterprise. To test security mindset at a company level, we asked respondents to what extent the following statement applies in their business. Here's the statement. In our organisation, security is regarded as the main priority when it comes to how we use IT. And it's striking that the extent to which respondents were able to recognise that trait in their business correlates strongly with how much their business spends on IT security. Nearly 4 times as many, that's 62% versus 17%, of the enterprises that spend more than 10% of their IT budget on security recognise this description of their corporate stance on IT security, compared with enterprises that spend less than 5%. So it would appear that words about the importance of security are indeed being backed up in the shape of higher proportions of IT budgets being ring-fenced for security purposes. We saw earlier that much of the anxiety about security emanates from employees' potential misuse of technology. So to test security mindset across the workforce, we asked respondents to what extent the following statement describes affairs in their company. Here's the statement. In our organisation, security is regarded by employees as the top priority when it comes to use of IT. And here the disparity in mindset is even more striking. None of the enterprises we surveyed that spend less than 5% of their IT budget on security related to this description of their organisation at all. It looks as though where budgets are more sparse, funds to do whatever is required to support or manage employees on security are hard to justify. Yet as we've seen, employees are regarded as one of the main Achilles heels when it comes to maintaining a security barrier. We tested organisational mindset on security in a number of different areas to assess the span of attitudes. The most interesting outcome is shown here and on the next slide. Here are listed a number of the points the survey put to respondents to test mindset, and the percentages contrast the responses of enterprises that regard IT security as a top priority at an organisational level, that's those numbers on the left, and those that don't, the numbers on the right. As we see in every case, more of the high priority group agree with the contention we put to them. These scores show a high degree of realism about the nature of the IT security task, and a sense that they know that the IT security job is never over. And finally, looking at how the same applies when contrasting the responses of enterprises that believe their employees are fully signed up to the primacy of IT security, those on the left, and those that don't, the numbers on the right. Again, there is a marked difference in how many of each type agree with the statements we put to them in the survey. So this is more evidence to suggest a disconnect between an elite group of enterprises that are both as on top of IT security as they can be and alert to the continuous challenge it represents, and the rest.